Good evening and welcome from Bahrain to our channel. So today we're going to talk about several different methods of two-color bait pouring or laminations. So there's many different options, and we'll start out with the most basic and the easiest that requires the least amount of materials or supplies, which is just simply hand pouring into the mold. It does require a little bit more skill, a little bit more dexterity. So basically get our plastic heated up and then we'll simply pour. You can also use a small injector for this. And now we'll move on to our next mold. This one's larger, so it should be a little bit easier. And the only determining factor on which side of the mold you poured is determined by what color you're using. So we have a white semi-transparent, and I want that for the belly, so we're just going to pour the belly first. And if you get a little carried away, you have any drips, you can simply wipe them off while everything's still liquid. And we'll move on to our final mold. And this method can also be used for doing multiple colors, skin pours, etc. We could pour one color in this bottom half, we could hand pour another color in this top half, and then come back and inject a third color into the entire mold to have 3 different colors. So now at this stage we have all of our hand pours done. We just simply reassemble our mold and we would inject as normal. Now, one word of caution that I've learned is that doing this method, you inject, because there is no filler in this bottom sprue, sometimes it will tend to go up and under the bait and lift it out of place. So what you can do to remedy this, take an old sprue and cut it down. You may even have to cut it in half, but this is an example. And this is made using one of my laminating plates that we'll go into later. So we'll simply insert this piece of old sprue material, and now it partially blocks off the port to each of these and will help force the plastic up and over the bait, resulting in less chance of injecting under the color that we're trying to achieve. So we'll grab one for our small ones. And we'll grab one for our medium. And then we just simply close the molds and inject as normal. But since we have a couple of other methods that we want to try out today, we'll do our injection a little bit later. And we'll move on to some different molds to show different techniques. Okay, now for our next method, we are going to use aluminum foil as a separator plate to do a 2-color lamination. The hand pour is a good method if you're only doing 1 or 2, or you only have a small amount of material you want to mix. This is a little bit better method because you can inject them and it's pretty fast and easy. The only drawback is you pretty much need to make a new piece of aluminum foil every time, unless you can find some that's very heavy duty, which is not available here in Bahrain. But it's very quick and easy. Simply open your mold, spread out your aluminum foil, and close it. Then you can simply trim off the excess. There's no reason to really get carried away with it, as you're going to be throwing it away when you're finished. So we'll just tear it off by hand. Now you do need to open up the screw hole for the injector, and I'll simply use my screw pliers to do that. And again, this doesn't need to be perfect. So now you would simply close your mold, clamp it, and inject. Simple as that. Which we'll do the injection a little bit later. We're going to move on to a couple of other methods, and we'll do our injections all at one time. Now for our next method, this one is a little more involved to begin, but once you get everything completed, you can inject much more quickly because our separator plate is going to be reusable. It's made out of a much thicker aluminum. This is just some aluminum serving trays. I try and find something that has a smooth bottom, no writing, so anything you can find that is close to that shape. And it's pretty easy. You just simply lay your mold on top, trace it, cut it out. Then I will lay the plate onto the open mold and clamp it down onto a piece of wood, and simply use the appropriate size drill bit and drill the holes. Now you do want to be careful with this portion because the aluminum is very thin, so it can tear or rip pretty easily. That's the reason for clamping it down onto something soft. Also, when you get finished, just go back with some sandpaper, emery cloth, and deburr it. You will also need to cut your screw hole, but the nice thing about this, it's reusable. And to use it, you simply place it in the mold, clamp it together, and inject. Now on a mold like this, which is a grub, because of the way it's separated, you end up with two halves, and you have multiple options on what you want to do with it. I tend to cut the tail off and just use a portion of the body, so you end up with something like this. And this is just one half of the grub, and once you inject it, you can have the tail down here one color, you can have this another color, so your possibilities are endless. Another option is you can inject these and then come back and carefully slice them in half, but that's a little more involved. They don't always cut quite so evenly. Now we have this one ready to inject. Okay, so here we have our homemade laminator plate, and here we have our aluminum foil. So let's go ahead and inject them so that we can start injecting color into our molds. Okay, let's open up our molds and get them ready for some color. I do need to make a couple fixes. So you can see we have one half here. We'll cut our screws so that we can separate them. And we have another half. So at this point, you can choose what you want to do. Do you want to let the tails mix? Do you want to have a completely different color tail? It's all up to you. You have many options at this point. So we're just going to leave these intact. We do have some tails because this is an angling AI mold, and I do have the tail mold for it. So we're going to trim our tails off. Make sure we cut enough, which we didn't, so we need to cut some more. Leave a little space. We'll let the new color mix the two. Do the same over here. Get our tail in place. So now we have our tails in place. We've left the screw in place so that we don't go up under the bait, and we'll just simply put our mold back together. You notice we left out our lamination plate, but if you also notice, we still have 4 additional baits that we can use to make a second injection. Now let's see how our Cinco mold is. So here's our first half. We'll trim back. So now we have one half here. We have our aluminum foil. We do need to trim back on our sprue a little bit, but we have Cincos ready to inject. As you can see, the foil doesn't hold up nearly as well as the aluminum plate. Plus, you'll notice that this side is more raised, more convex, whereas this side is more concave. So the aluminum foil does tend to move around a lot more, whereas this aluminum plate is a lot more durable and will give you nicer separations, more evenness on the bait thickness. But this will be fun. So close our mold back up. This is one of my do-it molds, so we will need to use some clamps. And now we have our foil lamination ready. We have our aluminum separator plate ready. Then we also have our 3 hand pours ready. So let's mix up and heat up some color, and then we'll be right back and we'll inject it and take a look at the final results. Okay, now we're going to inject our color. Make sure and top off all our sprues. Okay, we'll let everything cool off, and then we'll come back and open up the molds and see what we got. Okay, let's open up our molds and see how we did. There's a possibility that our 8-inch jerkbait may not be quite as nice as we like it because didn't use the big injector. So let's open up the big one first and see how bad we did. And we actually came out very nice. So you can see our sprue filler and see that nice clean clear separation for the belly. So this actually came out quite nice. Let's take a look at our next jerkbait. Again, nice clean fill. Nice color separation. You can see there's a little bit of a squiggly line, and that's just due to hand pouring. And our smallest jerkbait. And now let's move on. These were all our hand pours. Now let's move on to our aluminum foil separator. These are the Cincos, and you can see it's a lot smoother, cleaner separation line than on the hand pour. And last but not least, let's take a look at our grubs. We have our tails, and apparently we had some air in our tail, but you can see we have a nice clean color separation. These are the first 3 methods that are available. Now, if you have some of the other brands of molds, instead of using the aluminum plate, they offer a lamination plate, but unfortunately, Angling AI, they do not offer a lamination plate, so you have to come up with your own, which is going to be the hand pour, the aluminum foil, or the homemade 10 aluminum plate. Now, we'll get all this cleaned up and we'll come back and I'll show you a couple of other methods available for 2-color or multicolor laminations. Okay, we're back and we have our molds out again, and we're going to talk about a 4th method of laminating or 2-color injection. So this one I haven't seen anywhere, and this is something I just thought of the other day, and it's not going to work for every mold. You can't use it on your hinged do-it mold, for example, Now maybe you could remove the pins and do something like that, but it's not really worthwhile. Also, it's not going to work for a mold such as this Angling AI hammertail mold, because the split is a left and a right half versus this Angling AI fluke mold or jerkbait mold that's a top and bottom half. So what I've done is, since I did not have a laminating plate, you'll notice that a lot of the Angling AI molds are fairly symmetrical, meaning we can move them around. So normally the mold is going to go as such. However, if we take and we flip over the top half, you'll notice that it fits and everything lines up. However, we only have half of the hole. So close our mold up, and this isn't going to work with every injector also, but it should work with most. You will have to buy an extra nozzle, and it will take some care. I think something even better could be made up, such as a nozzle similar to this dual block, where we have a hole on each side. If we could have a nozzle made up with just the hole and the wall, that would be even better. But what I've done is taken one of my extra nozzles from my do it injectors and cut it using a Dremel where it just fits in to the mold. And you're always going to have a little bit of plastisol floating around, so it's going to kind of help seal off here. You might get a little bit of a spillover, but I mean, it's plastisol, it's not a big deal. You can always just collect it and reuse it again. So we'll do a couple molds like that, and that's why it's not going to work for a left-right half mold versus a top-bottom half, because then you would end up with the left side one color, the right side one color. The only way to truly laminate this one without doing a lot of cutting on injected baits is to use a dual or even triple injector, something to that effect. So let's put our molds together, heat up some plastic, and we'll come back and I'll show you how this split nozzle works. Okay, so now we have our injector with our split nozzle ready to go. We'll fill the injector, make sure it's lined up, make sure we top off our sprue as usual. And notice it does work, but sometimes it is a little troublesome to make sure you get it lined up, because it's a very tight fit and it has to be lined up just right, or it will not go in the hole. So it is a little tricky, but you'll get the hang of it. So we'll let this cool off and we'll take a look at them. Okay, we're back. Our molds have cooled off, so let's open them up and take a look. And again, this was injected with my custom modified injector nozzle and flipped mold halves. So we'll start out with our all we really need to do is we can remove this entire injection and do it again, or we can simply inject our second color. And since this is just for the video, we're going to leave them in place. We're going to trim the sprue to make sure we have room for the nozzle. Depending on how your mold is made and where the vents are, the tail may be a problem. So if it's not injecting well, you may need to cut the tails off so that the plastic can escape through the vents. We're going to do these a white with a heavy blue. So I really want the tail to be blue, so we're going to cut them off anyway. Here we have all our tails cut. Everything's lined up. We want to leave this half sprue in place to help keep from injecting under the bait. Now we'll just reassemble our mold as normal, and we'll continue on to our second mold. Make sure everything's in place, and now we're ready to inject the second color. So We'll get all that heated up and we'll come back and we'll do our second injection. Okay, we're back. We have our blue heated up and ready to go. And now we're going to inject the second color in our two molds. We'll let these cool off and we'll come back and open up. Okay, our molds have cooled off. Let's open them up, take a look at what we got. Here's our small jerkbait mold. You can see it's got a nice, clean, crisp color separation, which is more apparent on our larger mold. Let's take a look and do a little comparison. So this is with our separator plate versus a hand pour. So you can see the hand pour not quite as clean and crisp. It's a little bit more blend. So also depending on how well you pour, you could have a better result. But I really like this nice clean separation. So let's take a look. One last method, and that is the dual injector. So what we have here is a Do It Molds dual 4 ounce injector kit. When you get this kit, it's going to come with these two attached, which kind of makes it awkward to use separately. So I just simply cut them in half and haven't had any adverse effects from it. And to rejoin them, quite easy. You have your connector, just simply slide them in. We'll snug it up a little bit so they don't drop back out. Go wherever you feel comfortable. And I'll just kind of line up the plates. Make sure both injectors are sitting level to each other. And you can verify that with the plate at the top. The only other thing that you have to do to go from single to dual is attach the handle to connect the two injectors. We'll screw our knobs back on. And now we're back to a dual injector. So let's heat up some plastic, get it all ready, and we'll come back. Now, when you're dual injecting these molds, one thing that you're going to have to be careful of, and you're going to have to pay attention to, is what direction the top half and the bottom half of the mold is. So, for example, on these jerk baits, we have a top and a bottom. But then, when we come to this Hammer XL, instead of a top and bottom, we have a left and a right. So you need to pay attention to which way you set your dual injector onto the mold when you're ready to inject. If we place our dual injector like this, now we're going to have one color on the left, one color on the right. So you need to be aware of this before you start injecting. So for this particular mold, we need to make sure that the dual block is running parallel to our mold. Now, when we come to something such as our fluke or even some of my grub molds, we have a top half and a bottom half. So when you put your dual injector block, you're going to have to rotate it. Because now, instead of left and right, now we have top and bottom. So we're going to need to turn and inject perpendicular to the mold rather than parallel. So that's something you need to be aware of. Also be aware of your two colors and where they're going to end up in the mold. You need to take that into consideration also. Now, with this left and right and individual ports, naturally this mold is going to dual inject much better than this one that's a single port top injection and is going to inject into all 4 different cavities at one time. So it's not going to be as clean and crisp. It's not going to have as good of color separation as the single port injector will. But they still come out nice. Just depends on what you're really looking for. Let's get our plastic heated up and we'll come back and we'll put this into actual use and I'll show you One injection on this jerk bait and one injection on this Hammer XL mold, and you can see the difference, and you can see how well they both inject. Okay, so we're back and we have our colors heated, and we just need to make sure that we get everything in the right order. So I'm going to suck up our plastic, and this side is the bottom half of the mold. Now you notice we have to change direction. And now we need to top off our sprue. You will notice that dual injecting is a little bit trickier, simply because of having to get the colors heated up to the same temperature at the same time, and sometimes that can be a bit problematic. For some reason, some colors will heat up differently. You'll have to play around with that. Just keep that in mind. And we're going to inject one final mold that I use a bit offshore. So we'll get everything going and we'll be right back and do a second injection. It's hot and ready to go. And we'll go ahead and soak them up. Need to make sure we know top from bottom. Make sure we fill up our sprue. Okay everyone, we're back. All our molds are cooled down. Let's open them up and see how we did with our dual injection. Hopefully it came out good. As you can see, got a nice blue color, got a nice white color, and as you can see, there's a little bit of blending going on, so it's not quite as clean and crisp as using the laminating plate, but they still look good, and depending on the color that you're using, they'll work out great. Now here's our Hammer XL from Angling AI, our swim baits. You can see this one does a lot better, but it's also individual port injected, so naturally they are going to come out better. And in case you're wondering, I do have Angling AI offers a separate tail mold for these their hammer series, also for their grub molds. So you can see this one comes out a lot better than the jerk bait, and I really like the way these come out. And last but not least, this is a Collins custom mold, and these are originally designed as hand pour, but if you'll notice, and I'll trim back some of the sprue so you can see it, these are designed for hand pour, but it's such a large mold that I wasn't having very much success, so I modified it using epoxy to make it fit the injector, and I really like how it comes out now. And you'll also notice that I've used my Dremel and cut a few vents in the mold so that it'll fill properly, but I use these a lot offshore, very deep water, trolling, jigging, you name it, but these work very well. I really wish Collins offered them direct with setup for injection, but hey, that's part of custom bait making. You make things that you need. But you can see that the dual injection, it's not always a clean separation, but depending on your color choice, it can work out very well. So today we've covered 5 different methods, and again, we have our hand pour, which you can see, depending on how you pour it, it's going to determine how much of the bait has color and also how clean the line is. We had our Cinco that used aluminum foil, and you can see it was a nice clean separation. Ones that we use the separator plate, which seem to be hiding from me right at the moment. This is one that we used, one of my grub molds. We used the grub mold tail mold for the tail, then the aluminum separator plate made the white bottom came back, injected the blue top. Again, these are our dual injected. And here's one of our baits that we use, the reversed mold with the modified injector tip. So we covered 5 different methods of dual injection today. If you have any questions, any comments, please let me know. And I'm learning this as I go, so feel free to comment and give any suggestions or any comments you may have. We'll try and answer any and all.